word to wise. Grass only greener when it's fertilized. Gave them truth in these songs, they prefer to lies. Destiny beautiful, adrift in her purple light.
Before we get started, it only takes 2 clicks to become one of Earth's mightiest subscribers. Click. What's up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? I just want to let you know about a really awesome deal you can get at beautifulhalo.com, where you can pick up awesome Marvel Comics merch, DC Comics merch, really cool hoodies and designs, some of my favorite characters, probably some of your favorite characters. All you gotta do is go check out the link in the description and find out how you can get an awesome deal at Beautiful Halo. What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Ernie, Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. Okay, so today we are going to be talking about Jonathan Hickman and RB Silva's Powers of 10, number 4. And in this video, we are going to be talking about how Professor Xavier and Magneto convinced Mr. Sinister to join their little Krakoan tea party and kind of dip a little bit into why they need him. And we're also going to set up the earliest point where Charles Xavier set up the island of Krakoa. And we're going to talk about all of that right now. So first things first, and I think this is very telling when you're talking about why Mr. Sinister was brought into the fold of Charles Xavier and Magneto. The reason is very simple, and it's actually stated at the very beginning of this book, though the quote would seem innocuous to those who aren't really following it as closely. Charles Xavier is quoted as saying that, "I fear our needs will far outlast our desires. We have many hard choices ahead of us." And he even says at the very end of the book that I'm not afraid of what I've done, but I do fear what it will one day cost. That is as clear a reference as you can possibly get to the idea of bringing Mr. Sinister into the fold. And when they do, we find out that at the very beginning, when Moore was able to convince Charles and Magneto to work together in this 10th light to get everything right for a change, we find out that they traveled to Bar Sinister, which, for those who are not familiar, it is a secret island where all things Mr. Sinister exist. Pretty much it's a home to Mr. Sinister and all of his various and sundry genetic experiments. And it's quite a fabulous island, if I do say so myself. It's a very interesting place. I would love to live there if that didn't mean I had to be genetically modified into another Mr. Sinister and or possibly get killed for some random thing that I may or may not be aware that I've done. But when they arrive, and this is where I think Hickman really kind of shines, because he is able to inject some hilarity into this. There's a lot of humor in this scene and some very things I know a lot of people will probably immediately call shenanigans. They'll call Deadpool shenanigans right off the bat, but I think sometimes people forget Mr. Sinister is insane, and as Donnie Cates once told me, Deadpool did not invent crazy. But when they get there, while one of Mr. Sinister's clones is just talking rather spicy about Magneto's cape, we discover that Mr. Sinister is in fact quite a fan of capes and wonders why he doesn't have one. And this should also be a clear sign of some things that there are shenanigans going on. When Magneto and Charles pull up, Mr. Sinister isn't very interested in what they have to say, as Charles is trying to get him to look into the mutant X gene. He wants him to focus on the mutant X gene, and at this particular point in time, Mr. Sinister has no interest in the X gene because he even states that his experiments with it thus far haven't yielded him any results that he finds even the least bit interesting. But then we later find out that this, in fact, is not the real Mr. Sinister, or at least is not the one they need to be talking to. Mr. Sinister has a ton of clones. The dead giveaway should have been the fact that he didn't have a cape, or what Mr. Sinister often uses that passes for a cape. And then comes along a much more agreeable Mr. Sinister, more in line with the Mr. Sinister that we probably are familiar with. He walks up with a loaded pistol and blows the other Mr. Sinister's brains out all over the throne room floor. And he lets them know, I'm the Mr. Sinister that you're looking for, the one who is interested in all things X-gene related. And Magneto and Charles couldn't be happier at this moment because now they know that this is the guy that they want in charge. And what Charles wants this Mr. Sinister to do is to focus his efforts on the mutant X gene and start building stockpiles of data, stockpiles of files and samples that they can put together in order to create the ultimate mutant database. Something that we kind of know for a fact Sinister's already done before. This was something that was even focused on during Hunt for Wolverine, when we found out that Mr. Sinister had the DNA samples of not just every mutant on Earth, but every human being on Earth, period. He even had the DNA sample of Luke Cage and Jessica Jones' child, Danielle. That's just how far his mutant and human DNA database goes. The thing I think is really interesting about this is just how dedicated Magneto and Charles are to this, because you gotta remember, at this point, Mr. Sinister has not been an enemy of theirs yet. They really have no knowledge of one another other than what Mora has told them up to this point. But I think it's very telling that Charles is willing to give Mr. Sinister everything. Samples of every mutant in existence, including himself and Magneto's, and even says even the most difficult samples that you would have time finding, we'll even give those to you too. But this is all in aid of something, and we're gonna touch on that here in just a little bit. We're gonna connect all this in just a second, but I want you to understand, this ties very closely into what's coming up, I guarantee you, in House of X number 5. Charles is gonna plant an idea in Mr. Sinister's brain, subconsciously telling him to focus on the mutant X gene, and he is going to wipe Mr. Sinister's mind so that he doesn't know who told him to do it or why he's doing it. He's just gonna know that he's going to do it. He's gonna be compelled to do it, and he won't remember any of this until Charles tells him to remember. Now, another thing I think that's of note, and we're gonna kind of spend a little bit of time on this. I don't want to spend a whole heap of a lot of time, but we are gonna spend some time on it. And that is, there's a section, because all things in these books that are kind of I guess like exposition just written out for you, they are important. They're things you should know. And Hickman is basically telling us some things we might want to pay attention to regarding the future titles that are coming up after this whole House of X Powers of 10 deal is over. And these are all things that are probably going to pop up in X-Men, X-Force, Fallen Angels, Marauders, the New Mutants, and Excalibur. And basically what it is, this is the Red Diamond. It's kind of a way for people who are, Sinister clones to know what's going on in the world of Mr. Sinister. It's like a gossip magazine, but it's really interesting because at first I almost dismissed everything here because it just seemed like Hickman was being funny, but he's actually not. These are clear ties to what's coming up. So basically what you need to know, and I'm gonna run down the list. Like I said, I got paper here, so we're gonna be talking about these things for a minute. Sinister secret number 1. He's trying to pretend that no one noticed he was wearing red shoes, but this truly Sinister isn't fooling anyone. Now, what I think he's actually talking to, even though I know he uses the pronoun he, I think this actually more directly goes towards the Miss Sinister, the female version of Mr. Sinister, where basically Mr. Sinister lived on through, I believe it was Claudine Renko, and this was like back in, this was like 2008 X-Men's Legacy number 214 or something like that. Anyway, but the whole thing is that this particular version of Mr. Sinister, this Ms. Sinister, she pretty much just kind of does whatever she wants. She's never really been in the same line of thinking exactly as Mr. Sinister proper, but I think this is kind of a tease that she's going to be coming back. And this is Sinister secret number 2. He says that, and speaking of fashion, the Whisper Network has turned into a roar regarding the return of this trend-setting mutant who was cut down in his prime. Will someone please tell all these mutants to stop wearing human clothes and join the stampede across their island full of flowers to the flower that's the fullest. Now, I don't really know who he's talking about here because I've heard some people say this might be Cyclops he's referring to because there's only a handful of mutants you could talk about who were cut down in their prime, but I don't know, Cyclops seems to be the only one I can think of because he is typically the one who wears human clothes the most. Or maybe this is metaphorical. This is probably the one Sinister secret I'm not 100% sure about. The rest of them, I'm pretty positive about. But anyways, let's move on. The next one, Sinister secret number 3, says that years ago, a deceased redhead pretender made a pact with the devil. When she passed on, most believe that any secrets she had went with her to the grave. Won't everyone be surprised when they find out not only is this not true, but she left behind a whole lot more than secrets. Now, this is a reference to Madeline Pryor, and I'm pretty sure what this means is that maybe other than the fact that she may make a return, there may be something else that is in the wings waiting, perhaps a child or children, because we do know that that has happened. Now, secret number 4, this one is a little more tricky too, because this one states that while every Sinister has been busy wondering how they might be affected by current events, almost no one noticed what washed ashore. A word of advice to all things Sinister: don't embrace the revelry or there won't be anything for you to celebrate. Now, this is all stuff that technically refers to mutants, so it's not a hard grab to think that maybe what he's talking about is Prince Namor, who has been absolutely wildin' lately, and I'm gonna go and tell you right now, something tells me the X-Men and Namor are gonna cross paths pretty soon. Now, this next one isn't so much a Sinister secret as it is a secret revealed, and this one is very easy to explain. It basically just tells you where Mr. Sinister got his mutant gene from, because you gotta remember, Nathaniel Essex is not a mutant. He is a human mutate, technically speaking. He stole his mutant gene and turned himself into a mutant, which I guess technically kind of makes him the Rachel Dolezal of mutants. But basically, he got this DNA from John Proudstar, Thunderbird, which is interesting. I think that's very interesting. And I think there will be some receipts for that coming up here pretty soon. That's not something that I think Hickman would just throw out there and just, willy-nilly and not address at a later point. The next Sinister secret, and this is secret number 5, says that he's the best there is at what he does. She's married with a kid. The husband knows exactly what's going on, but who is he to point the finger? He's up to much the same and more. Maybe this is just the new normal on the mutant island. This one is a clear nod at the love triangle between Wolverine, Cyclops, and Jean Grey, and I think even more so that this is maybe letting us know that that love triangle will probably come up again, especially when you consider that the X-Men title that's coming out after this is all over does include Cyclops, Wolverine, and Jean Grey. Now for Sinister secret number 6, it says that everyone believed that the plan of this Progerian mutant with secret Sinister ties was foiled, but little did the gifted ones know that the destroyed samples were switched out beforehand. And this is a reference to Strife, who Mr. Sinister used to work with. And this is also a reference to the Legacy virus. So I don't know if that means the Legacy virus is coming back or if Strife is coming back, but it just sounds like some things are going to be, floating out there in the wind. I don't think this, like I said, none of this stuff is mentioned willy-nilly. Sinister Secret 8 says that for years, the fittest of all mutants has routinely surrounded himself with a particular numbered entourage. These hangers-on stick around for a while until they are eventually replaced with newer, more exciting members. What most people don't know is that if the original members return, these pretenders would be dropped so fast their heads would spin. And what they're referring to is Apocalypse and his original recipe for Horsemen. And this is something that's also backed up in Marvel number 1000, where he does say that yes, they are Billy Badass. And when you get to Sinister Secret number 9, it basically states that they say the kids are all right, but all is not right in paradise. This non-couple has been apart so long, friends are expecting that when they see each other again, fireworks are going to ensue. Is the universe ready? Judging by how unprepared everyone was for what's happened so far, we kinda doubt it. And in this, what they're referring to is Apocalypse and Mora X. At least that's what I think. I think what they're talking about is the fact that when Mora and Apocalypse meet again, are they gonna get back together? And if they do get back together, what's gonna happen? Because you gotta remember, when you go back to House of X number 2, Mora talks about why she didn't reunite with her husband from her previous life, because she knew so much about him. She knew all of his strengths and weaknesses, his quirks, and the things that she hated about him were amplified by the fact that she knew them before they would even get to know each other again in the next life. So it makes you wonder if that will happen or what, but who knows? We don't know. We'll find out. And then we get another Sinister secret revealed, and it says that we don't hear this word spoken often, so when we do, it's best to pay attention. Because when you square that circle, what took a long time to build can come crumbling down rather quickly. And what they're referring to is the Inferno Event, and they're just revealing it right then and there. They are talking about Inferno, and Inferno is an old event that happened a long time ago, back in the 80s, I believe. I don't really 1000% remember. Like I said, I'm just speaking off the cuff. But I will say that they have also revisited this in more recent years, and I think what they're letting us know is that once all this Krakoa business is settled and the X-Men have found their place in the the world of the Marvel Universe, the Inferno Event will likely come and threaten to tear it all down. And then the final one is Sinister Secret 10, where he says which brainwashed mutant Sinister was replaced long before a certain bald somebody knew and has been in on the game for almost as long as the game was being played. Basically, what this is saying is that when Charles Xavier implanted in Mr. Sinister's mind, that we were just talking about a while ago, even though he implanted this in his mind and then had it wiped, it heavily implies that Mr. Sinister had this knowledge sent to another clone, and that clone remembers exactly everything that Charles told him and is now working, very likely in opposition of Charles Xavier, and explains that whole betrayal arc that we hear about in some of the exposition points in the previous issues of House of X and Powers of 10. So like I said, it's a huge info dump, and I know a lot of people are gonna probably be scratching their heads about it, but I'm just letting you know this is what it is. The next thing is gonna be kind of easy to explain because we technically knew a lot of this. We basically get to see months ago, which kind of lines up with the timeline of House of X and when Krakoa was formed as a mutant nation. We see Charles Xavier take Douglas Ramsey, Cypher, to the island of Krakoa, and while Douglas seems very about it, he doesn't really seem to be interested in it at all. He thinks that this is kind of a waste of time. Charles Xavier's brought him here for a very specific reason, and that is to learn how to communicate better with the island of Krakoa. Charles reveals that in recent times, he has figured out how to communicate with Krakoa on a more minor level, and even though, yes, this is an island that is typically known as a place mutants go to die, Charles is looking to turn that around, and he's found a way to make peace with the island, and he wants Cypher to help him solidify that by making a language and, more importantly, making an interface. He introduces Cypher to Krakoa, and everything is going, I guess, rather well. And Douglas, he's sitting there. He's actually able to kind of figure it out. He's going through the motions to understand Krakoa, and it takes him a few minutes, but he finally figures out exactly how Krakoa works, at least to a point. But as here, we also learn some of the history of Krakoa, and Krakoa itself kind of tells Cypher that at one point in time, it wasn't just an island, it was once more like a continent. And the original land was called Okara, and that continent was rendered asunder by these creatures who came from the deep. And this may also be in line, and I don't know, like I said, I'm speaking out of my ass here, but I think this also may be another clear reference to the Inferno ties that I brought up earlier, that this may be what comes back to bite Krakoa in the ass. And Krakoa speaks of a champion and his horsemen, and this champion is Apocalypse. And I'm assuming that the horsemen that are with him are his original recipe for horsemen that are also teased in some of those Sinister Secrets. So you're seeing some of these seeds are already kind of starting to pay dividends right now. We just don't really know exactly where it's gonna go or when it's finally going to come to a head. Basically, Cypher is learning the entire history of Krakoa and how Krakoa was split into two separate entities, one being Krakoa and the other being Araka. And what Cypher learns is that these islands, since they have been split, they are never meant to become reconnected. But something tells me that Hickman is letting us know they will probably be reconnected, or at the very least, we will see Araka come back in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Charles basically leaves Cypher to his own devices to figure out how to set this up, how to interface with Krakoa and build the island nation that they need. And I'm guessing that Charles, in some way, shape, form, or fashion, maybe he doesn't tell or reveal to Cypher everything that he knows about the previous lives of Mora X or any of the other things that he knows, but he tells him at least enough to get Cypher on board and let him know what he needs to do, and that is to interface with Krakoa in some way and help him build the island nation that they are trying to build, and what we know was successfully built. Now, something I think that is also going to pay dividends here, and I don't know, maybe this is more tied to how it's going to pan out for Cypher to build or interface with the island, but we do see a scene where his right arm touches a flower, and we start to see that the flowers become, I guess for lack of a better way to put it, infected with the transmode virus, which is basically ties to the Phalanx and the character Warlock. So I don't know how that's gonna play out, and I know they set this up to kind of tie maybe loosely into the next story in Powers of 10 that I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm not gonna spend hardly any time on. And what we learn is that the interface that Cypher built kind of breaks down into four distinct different categories, one of which being transit and monitoring, which is run by Sage. Defense and observation interface is run by Black Tom Cassidy. The secondary and external systems are run by Trinary, and Overwatch and data analysis is run by Beast. And then we also learned that somewhere underneath Krakoa, there is a place run by Forge that is basically a biological machine that is supposed to be used for mutant expansion on the island, which makes me wonder if that's tied to the nowhere place that we know that was brought up, like the flower that can basically create an area on the island itself or anywhere else that Krakoa isn't aware of, and maybe by proxy tied to the area where Charles is creating the pods that birth, or clone or resurrect mutants. We don't really know yet. Kind of going back to what I said about the Phalanx in regards to Cypher, I'm gonna go ahead and tell you right now, I don't really get what's going on in year 1000, and I apologize. So I'm not going to address it in any major way. I'm just gonna let you know that basically the Phalanx agree to assimilate, or rather ascend, I guess, mutants of year 1000. And it seems like the Phalanx don't necessarily assimilate the mutants, but assimilate their machines. I don't really get it. This is actually the one part of Powers of 10 that I was really excited about when I found out that the Phalanx were going to be factoring back into the story, but then I became really disappointed in the fact that it's so over my head that I can't really bring myself to be as interested in it as I want to be. So, you know what? I'm just not going to talk about it. Just know that the Phalanx are still there. They have made a decision. The blue people, who I'm assuming are, the next step in mutant evolution, are trying to figure out if there's a way to ascend, even though the Phalanx said yes, but no, maybe yes. And I'm going to tell you right now, the next thing that we have to look forward to is House of X number 5, which is a highlighted issue, so prepare to have your socks blown off for that one, because we know that one is going to be titled Society, based on the Krakoan language. And we know that Powers of 10 number 5 is going to be called For the Children, and seems to maybe still focus yet on Mr. Sinister. So we don't know. We're going to find out soon enough. But anyways, let me know what you thought about Powers of 10 number 4 by Jonathan Hickman and RB Silva. Sound off in the comments. So hey, you made it to the end of the video. Awesome for you. If you enjoyed this video, and if you made it this far, I don't see how you didn't, do me a favor. Hulk smash that like button. And if you want to see more awesome videos like this one, make sure you click subscribe so you can become one of Earth's mightiest subscribers, and tap that bell so you know when I post up. Also, feel free to go check out my Patreon, where if you chuck in $1, you can get early access to most of my videos up to a week early. And if you have time, make sure you swing by nerd901.com, where you can find more of my content as well as other amazing stuff. Anyways, until next time, I love you 3000 plus ultra.